Hi, today we're going to be talking about the two different types of a serial killer, which are disorganized and organized. But before we get into that, we're going to talk about what a serial killer is. And a serial killer is someone who commits 3 or more murders on separate occasions, often with a cooling off period. And the cooling off period can be from a few weeks, months, years, but the longer the cooling off period, the more common it is with an organized serial killer. And next, we're going to be talking about when the term first being used. And the term was first used by Special Agent Robert Ressler of the FBI. And that was in the 1970s, which really was not that long ago, so it's still somewhat a relatively newer term that we are using today. And some people often get them confused with mass murderers. And are they the same? No, because a serial killer murders on several occasions, and a mass murder murders all at once. So they are very different. And a fun fact is, when the motive of a murder is anger, the average IQ is at its highest, which is at 101.1, which is a very interesting fun fact that I found when I was doing research for this. And the study was done by Radford University. And as you can see at the bottom, not all serial killers fit neatly into disorganized or organized, which is important to remember because they can even switch between the two as they either fall apart or maybe they are getting more organized and they're learning more while they commit their murders. So then that raises the question, why do profilers study them to begin with if they don't really fit into disorganized or organized? And the first reason will be because while they don't necessarily fit evenly or neatly, rather, into disorganized or organized, we can still understand their behavioral patterns and predict their future actions with their behaviors that we can see from disorganized or organized because they're more likely to do certain things. The next reason is because it helps investigators link cases and identify offenders faster, which is very important, can be very crucial in cases when involving murder, especially when you can see that the murderer has no intentions of stopping themselves. So first, we're going to go into disorganized. And we're going to talk about this traits and behaviors because they differ very heavily than an organized. So some of the traits include impulsive and unplanned attacks, evidence left behind, such as a fingerprint, low social skills, which that means they are not going to be as charismatic as some may think, to be able to lure victims because they don't do that. They don't have set victims at times. A lot of times they use they find victims of opportunity rather than stalking and planning and prepping. And their average IQ is lower than a organized serial killer, which makes sense because if they are so disorganized, they likely aren't that smart. And their victims are often known, or like I said, of opportunity. And they generally have just little to no attempt at hiding evidence. So they will leave bodies at the scene, or they will even leave their murder weapon, fingerprints at times, or just evidence that could just very easily have them be linked to their crimes. And they often don't bring a murder weapon to the crime since they are victims of opportunity. And part of the psychological profile is they generally will have a lower, less ideal job history. Or they could live near the crimes because they are victims of opportunity or people that they know. And they are more emotionally driven. And according to the FBI, 33% are disorganized. And the average IQ is 93.2, which is very interesting because it's a decent amount lower than the organized. Next, we will talk about organized serial killers, which is very interesting. So their traits are very different. You'll see that they have planned and controlled crimes. So a lot of them will be prepping before the crime in order to make sure the crime scene is very well thought out, so they're less likely to be caught. They bring weapons or tools with them. Some may even have a kill kit. And they have a higher average IQ. And they have a longer cooling off period than disorganized generally. They remove and conceal their evidence. So they will take their murder weapons, they will make sure it's wiped down, or they will clean up the blood, and they will remove the body and move it into a second location to either dismember it or bury it, burn it, like any way they can conceal the body to hide their crimes. And they are more socially competent, so it is more common for them to have a family, friends, or meaningful connections. Part of their psychological profile is they have stable employment. They might even be at the top of their company, or they will have just consistent employment over time, and all their coworkers will have a lot of positive things to say. And they are more likely to follow media coverage, which is interesting. And they may even relocate to avoid detection for their crimes, so they will not be caught as easily. And 67% are organized, according to the FBI. And the average IQ is 99.6, which is very interesting because it's quite different than the disorganized. An example of an organized serial killer is Gary Ridgway, or the Green River Killer. And I find him very fascinating. I find him honestly one of the most fascinating serial killers of all time, because he would go into different states and he would bury kill kits into the ground and would come back years later to kill somebody in that exact spot, which just seems unheard of to me, and seems like something they would put in a movie that maybe seems a little bit far-fetched. And he is a fairly textbook definition of an organized serial killer, because he's obviously very planned out. As I mentioned with the kill kits, his crime scenes are very controlled. He hides and moves the bodies. He waits months or years before he kills again to avoid detection. He lived a normal life, and he lured and killed victims that he trusts because he was a bit more charismatic. And then an example for a disorganized serial killer, which he is a bit more popular now because of the Netflix movie or show, I'm not sure which one it was. But his name is Ed Gein, and he is just very textbook definition of disorganized. He didn't conceal evidence. He has intense mental illness, psychosis, delusions, and necrophilia. His victims are chosen at random. There was no pre-planning. There was no plan at all. He had it was a victim, a lot of them were victim opportunities. He was just very socially isolated. He killed near home. He had no attempt at all at hiding the bodies as a whole. So he was caught, but overall, you can see his traits line very heavily up with the ones I listed below. But thankfully, he was caught in the end. But that is all that I have for my presentation today. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.